In this lecture, we are going to be going over a sample jQuery demo to show you the different features of jQuery. jQuery is the most commonly used and best supported of the JavaScript libraries. It's also the oldest, and it's the one that I feel I can rely on. Other frameworks, they seem to be like the choice of the week, and they're well supported for a couple years before the fad moves on to another framework. And then if you've based your entire website on that framework, you have to redo it. I've run into that problem with my code assessor website, where it was based on Joomla, which was hot for a while, but then it just kept getting updated. It's no longer that popular, and my website is now out of date. But if I use jQuery, I could be pretty sure that my website would never go out of date. They seem to have a pretty stable API. So I really like jQuery, and in your projects and homework assignments, it's okay if you use jQuery. So jQuery has a number of very helpful features that make dealing with JavaScript easier. So it makes it easier to locate HTML elements like form elements or just labels or other things that you want to change in your web page. And that falls under the category of what jQuery calls selectors. They also provide good support for DOM manipulation. So remember, the big thing with JavaScript was we wanted to be able to manipulate the web page without completely reloading it. And jQuery gives us good support for manipulating the elements. So adding new elements, so adding or deleting or modifying. It also gives us good support for registering events or registering callbacks with events. So things like a click event or a change event, very easy to register events with either a single form widget or multiple form widgets. It provides nice support for animations, especially when you're looking to do things like hide or show different elements. It has ways of animating them, like fading them in, fading them out. But it also has support for more sophisticated animations, which we won't get into in this course. It's beyond the scope of the course. But it provides ways to control the timing of the animations, calling functions to animate something. It provides ways to transition between or interpolate between numbers. For example, if you want the width of a rectangle to go from 100 pixels to 400 pixels, it has a way of specifying the pacing of that. So that's very nice. And then it makes it easy to make AJAX calls. So it provides nice support for AJAX calls. You've already read about all of this in the textbook and done exercises with them, and you'll be doing some more exercises with jQuery when you get to the challenge activities. So I thought instead of just lecturing over all of that, which you've already read about, I'd give you a nice example. And it will be the count ballot example that we worked with JavaScript, which you did in class. So if you remember, the idea is you have some colors, you can vote for a color, and if you change that, if someone else is voting a lot and changing them every 10 seconds, we're going to update our counts over here. So in just a couple seconds, these dates, you just saw them, they just update it. And if you remember, it was kind of verbose when we had to do the functionality for this website with JavaScript. And I'm going to now go through the original, start with the original HTML, the original JavaScript. I'm going to show how it all can be simplified using jQuery. So if you remember, here is the original HTML. Actually, it looks like we have a broken pipe here. So let's get back into the website first. So let's just first look quickly at what the HTML looked like. So we have the color palette as the form. We have 5 radio buttons, and we have some events on load we call, request counts to get the counts from the database. When we click, we want to submit the ballot to the database to get it updated. And we need to update the values of these labels that we have here when we return. So each of these is a label, and we use this identifier to update the appropriate label. So now what I want to do is I want to use jQuery to handle this website. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get the jQuery from somewhere. And there's many different places that host the most recent version of jQuery. It seems that if you get it from the JQuery.com itself, it should be the most up-to-date, but you can get it from Google. You can store it locally. These 2 attributes, just make sure that someone hasn't tampered with it, that you're getting a valid version. So you add this between the script tags to your HTML file. And you can see I'm also already have the script tag for countBallot.js. So let's now go and start to modify countBallot. And we're going to start with the AJAX calls that we had. So the first AJAX, let's do the simple one first, request counts. So this was the callback function we had before. When the page gets loaded, we were getting a AJAX request object, adding an event listener to load that called initialize counts. Then we were calling get counts, telling it the response type was JSON, and then sending it. These 5 lines of code can be replaced with a single line of AJAX, or I'm sorry, jQuery. So here's the one line that replaces all of that. So you start with the $. That is short for creating a jQuery object. And we call get. And we're going to call getCounts.php. So that takes care of this open and this send right here. Then we do not have any parameters, so we'll just pass in a null object for the parameters. Then the third argument is going to be the name of our callback function, which is initialize counts. So you can see that we are getting rid of the need to have the add listener down here. And finally, the type, the return type that we expect is JSON, so now we don't have to do this response type. So with one line of code, we have eliminated these 5 lines here. And as we always should do, we can very quickly test this before we move on. So let's reload the page, and we have a bug. Okay, so we need to figure out what that bug is. So when we have a problem like this, the best thing to do is go and look at the console window. So I'm dealing with Firefox. If you're dealing with Chrome, you can find the console there as well. So here in Firefox, I'm going to go look at the web console, and I see it says type error, result is undefined, and it tells me it occurred at countbalance.js line 46. So let's go look at line 46. And what we see is that result, in fact, we're saying is equal to this dot response. And the problem I now realize is I haven't yet updated initialize counts to work with jQuery. It's still working with the original JavaScript code that I wrote. But when I make a AJAX request via jQuery, then I have to use the JQuery form of the result. And the JQuery form of the result is that I get my data back not in this dot response, but in fact in a data object. It's a JSON object, and it's passed back as a single parameter to my callback function. So I am going to go ahead and change the function now, because otherwise my website's going to remain broken. So I no longer need result because it's coming in through data. So I'm going to get rid of result. And now what I'm doing, instead of iterating through result, I am iterating through data. So again, data is exactly the same JSON object that would be returned from the response slot if I was just using JavaScript without jQuery. But jQuery is instead transmitting this response object to me as a parameter. So I'm going to use that parameter instead. Now what I want to do is show you how I can use a jQuery selector to get to the correct label. So before I was doing a get element by ID, but now I want to use a selector. So let's just for a moment go back and look again at the HTML. So what I'm trying to get a hold of right now are these IDs. So if what was returned is red, I need to concatenate red with count. And what I need to do is find the element associated with this ID. So in jQuery, the way to do that, again, we start it with $, just short for jQuery. And we start with the hashtag because that's the ID. And then the color is coming back still in color obj from data. So I can still use what I used before. I'm just going to copy and paste here. So I'm just concatenating the return color with count. So that's going to give me my selector. So in this case, what it would really be, when I was done, if the color was red, it would end up looking like that. Okay, so that's what it would evaluate to. And I no longer use inner HTML. Instead, to modify the HTML content, I can use either HTML if I want to include HTML tags, or I can use text if I just want it plain text. Here, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use HTML, and I am going to fill it in with color obj count. Well, let's just color obj count is the return value. So that will set the HTML to be that value. So now I should be able to delete this line of code. I don't need to change the timeout. I'm still going to let that at 10 seconds. So I should now be able to write this, and we'll try reloading. And it worked perfectly, just like what I wanted. Okay, so now let's move on to the second function, which is submit ballot. And that gets called on an onClick event. And again, it needs to call the server. It wants to get a AJAX request object. It wants to, in this case, call ballotCount.php. It needs to pass, in this case, a parameter, which is the value of the selected element. And we want to call update counts when we return. That should be our callback function. And I want it to add a parameter to my callback procedure, which is the color of the element I just selected. Like if I selected red, I would like to pass in a string red to my callback function. So let's start again by creating our the AJAX object that we want. So again, it's $get, and this time we are calling ballotCount.php. Now, we have to somehow pass in the request data, and here I'm just going to put it in directly in a JavaScript object. If it was bigger, I'd probably put it in a variable. So I'll first do it this way and then show you how I could just put it in a variable. So I'm passing color, and the value is going to be the value of the color. So to get the color, I am going to actually set var color to be equal to element.value. So now I'm going to pass in color. So the data is now passed in as a essentially JavaScript object. This is going to get converted to JSON. So essentially what you're doing is creating any valid JSON object here, and that will be parsed and sent with key value pairs to the PHP script. Okay, so now I need the function, the callback function, but I can't just put here update counts like I would like, because I need to be able to pass to update counts the color as a second string. And all that JQuery does is it passes in, it passes in the data object that it's returning. It passes just one argument. So what I'm going to have to do instead is create what's called a function closure. So I'm going to do that on a new line. So I can create an anonymous function, and it's going to take data because that is the return, or that's the one value that gets passed in. And I'm going to have it call update counts, passing it data and color. Now you'll notice color was defined right here. And what this is doing is creating what is called a function closure. And JavaScript deals with that a lot, so it's worth writing it down. It's called a function closure. And what it means is that when you create a function, I'll call it a nested function because it's being created inside of another function. The nested function can access local variables in the enclosing function. So when it creates this callback function, I'm able to access variables from the enclosing function, and that includes any parameters to the enclosing function. And JavaScript will remember the values of those variables when the function exits. So coming back here, even though this function is going to exit, submit ballot, JavaScript will remember for me the value of color, and I will be able to access this value when update counts is called. So this is called creating a function closure, and this is how I can pass additional arguments to my callback function. Now, the last thing is that the response type is JSON. So I finish up with that. And again, I am done. I can actually delete all of the other code that I had. So this getting of the HTML request, that is $.get. This association of update counts with load is the third argument to the AJAX request object for JQuery. The call to ballot count is the first argument. The parameter here that I had to do before as a parameter string is now just a JSON object, and my response type corresponding to this response type. And then I handled the extra parameter by creating this function closure right here. And the send command automatically gets sent once this get function returns. Now I did say, what if my parameters were a bit bigger here? I could have just created a local var too. I could have said something like parameters equals color, like that. I could have added additional values to that object if I wanted, and then here I could have just said parameters. Okay, but I think in this case, since it's so short, it's just easier and simpler to write it this way. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of these lines of code. And it's not going to work just yet because, again, down here I'm going to have to update counts first. And in fact, here I see that I misspelled color. I'm going to have to update that too. There we go. Oops. So update counts is taking data and a color, and I don't have to name it color. I could name it anything I want it, like C. It's not like it has to exactly match what I had before, but in this case I will name it color. I can get rid of result because the result is in data. Now you may remember that the PHP script returns false if the update fails, and it otherwise returns an integer representing the updated count. So I'll just check if it's not data, meaning if it returned false, I'll alert that the update failed. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and update the count to the appropriate value. And again, what I need to do is get the element, which I get with a hashtag because ID attributes, the selector starts with a hashtag, just like the CSS selectors do. So basically, JQuery uses the same selectors that CSS uses. Then I can use color that I passed in as my color, and count will give me what I want. So for example, that would give me red count if the color was red. And again, I call, this time to show you, I can just use text instead, and data is the return value. So I will just use text in this case, and that should be enough to update the associated label. So again, let's save that, and check out, see if that's going to work for us. So let's reload this. And something has gone wrong. We see that there is an error saying that request counts is not defined, but we also see we have a missing, right here, a missing right parentheses after the argument list in countBalance.js line 4 right here. So countBalance line 4. So let's go take a look at line 4. And it says that we have a missing right parentheses, which I am not actually seeing right now. So let's just load it again, see if I get the same problem or not. And it's still saying that I do have a syntax error. So we're going to need to check that out. Okay, so let's go back and check again, see if I can see what's wrong. Okay, we got a semicolon right there. It should have just been a comma. So the semicolon was prematurely terminating that get statement. Hopefully that's the problem. So we reload. Looks promising. We hit red. Very good. So it's doing exactly what we want. So you can see that we have significantly reduced the amount of code that we are using. In fact, if right now I believe we're at 42 lines in this file. So if we word count countBalance.js, we're at 42 lines. And I am going to word count the color palette that I started with. And it had 56 lines. So we've saved 14 lines over what we had before. So it's a nice savings. And a lot of it is comments that I really could not have gotten rid of anyhow. Now, there are a couple more things I want to show. So in your web projects, you're going to have to sometimes add or delete elements from your HTML, specifically in your assignments or web project. Let me bring that up for a moment. In fact, let's do it here. So on your plan, you're going to have to be able to add things like I did right there with the new button, and you're going to have to be able to delete things by doing remove. So here, if I hit the trash can, it removes it. So a couple things with your plan is going to require you to add and delete objects, and sometimes you may actually have to delete them from the beginning like you would right here. So if I did a delete there, I would have to delete it. So let's go and see how you can do that with JQuery, how you can add something. So what I'm going to do is when I select something, I'm going to at the bottom indicate what I selected, what color I selected. So let's go to back here and let's go to update counts. And at the end of it, we're going to add a node that says with a piece of text saying what I selected. So in this case, I'm going to be appending to body. So I'm going to use the body as my selector. You'll have to use a different selector for your object when you're in your web project. You'll probably be using some kind of ID to identify the div that you want to add to. So there'll probably be a hashtag and then the name of an identifier here. So something like maybe plan would be what you would be doing in your web project. But here, I'm just appending to the body. And I'm using append. I'm going to add a div. So you can just give the HTML string that you want to add. So I'm going to say you select it, and then the color that they selected. And I have to terminate that div. So there it is, just a simple append. It's going to append this div to my web page with the color that I selected. So let's go back here, reload. Let's get rid of that for a moment. See, I selected blue. Now I'm going to select orange. You selected orange. Now I'm going to select green. You selected green. So it's adding them one at a time. Now, as you might imagine, this might not be what you want. You probably don't want it adding these things one at a time. You probably just want one thing to display, and that is the most recent color that you selected. So to handle that situation, I'm actually going to go, and rather than adding it here every time and then removing it, that's kind of inefficient. I could remove it. In fact, to show you that, I'm going to do a delay here. So I am going to say dot delay. Well, actually, going to append it to here. So you can do chaining. So I'm going to chain a delay of 3 seconds. And then I'm going to add to that a remove statement. In fact, normally you would put them on another line. So here I'm simply going to remove the div that I added. So what I want to do here is remove it after 3 seconds. So I'm going to start with this, which is not going to work, but I want to see if you can figure out why. So we're going to do it, and we click, and it actually is working. I'm surprised. Make sure I wrote this. That's what I wanted. So it deleted, it completely removed everything, which is not what I wanted. So what happened is this remove is actually being applied to this body rather than to this div tag right here. And you can see I actually had added an ID equals selected while I was figuring this out. So the problem is this remove refers to this body tag, which is not what I want. So I need to actually put this remove tag, and I'm going to go after that selected. So here I added ID equals selected. So I'm going to say that what I want is to actually remove selected like that. And I want to do it after a delay of 3 seconds. So I save that and reload. And I hit it, nothing appears. Okay, and that's because, as the book indicated in section, I think it was 9.4, non-animation events take place immediately rather than being delayed. So this delay right here, this delay right here only refers to the delay for the next animation event. There is no next animation event, so this remove is immediately executed. So the solution to that, as the book indicated, is to use something called the Q command. So what I'm going to do is add a Q command, which is going to queue up the operation that I want to do. So I pass it this next object, which effectively forces the next function in the queue to get called. And now I am queuing up this remove so that it happens in 3 seconds. And then this is very important that I call the next function that was passed in, so that then the next function in the queue gets executed after this. So now if I write this and reload it, I select 42. You can see in 3 seconds it goes away, or I select orange, and in 3 seconds it goes away. Now this isn't very efficient because I keep adding and subtracting from the document object model. So a more efficient way to handle this is to actually go into my HTML and add this div to the HTML. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this div actually into the HTML. So let me copy that. Then I'm going to delete this statement. And instead, I'm going to put this back into the HTML. So I'm going to put this at the end of the form. And I don't know what the color is right now. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to create a span that will allow me to find the color and then easily put in a new color. So I'm going to say, this will be, let's say, selected color. And I need to terminate my div. And I don't want it to display initially. If I just save it right now, it's going to not look good. It's going to say you selected, and that's not what I want. So I'm also going to put in the, I should put this in the style sheet, but I don't want to put in the style sheet because that just takes more effort. Right now I'm just going to say display none. And what that does is it's going to make it invisible. So when you say display none, it makes it invisible when it first appears. So you can see now it's exactly what I want. But now I need to make this div appear and disappear when I want to display what color I selected. So we need to go back now to our count ballot. And what I'm going to do is I am going to fill in the color. Here in update counts. So I'm going to first of all have to find the element that I want, and I know that it is selected color. And I want to set its text to be whatever the color is. So that will set that span object that I showed you a moment ago to be the right color. And now, after I've done that, what I want to do is have it show, and then the div I want it to show, and then I want it to stay there for 3 seconds, and then I want it to fade out. So I'm going to say have it show slowly. I need to put a parentheses here. Then I want it to fade out after 3 seconds. So I'm going to use the fade out animation effect. I want it to be slow. So this will first show it slowly, then delay for 3 seconds, and then fade out. And first I set the color to be the color that I want to appear. And it didn't like it. So let's quickly take a look to see what it did not like. And it says I have a literal for the spring. And that's right, because here I started it with a single quote, but I ended it with a double quote. So let's reload that again. and select green. Okay, select again, select blue. It's not working. Okay, well, actually, that's because I used the wrong ID here. The name of the div was selected. The name of the span is selected color. The name of the div is selected. So let's write that and try reloading. Select red. There we go. It's selected red. And it faded out. Now notice how it comes in a bit slowly and then it fades out. Do it one more time. Fades in, fades out. Does not fade in. It comes in all at once, it fades out. Okay. Just to show you one more thing here, we could also change the color. So maybe it'd be nice if this color would actually be purple right here. So what I'm going to do, one more thing, is in addition to changing the text, I can call CSS with JQuery and I can set different properties. In this case, I'm going to set the color property for this object. So I called CSS and I'm just now can set this color. If I was going to do more than one property, as the book shows, I would actually have to use a dictionary. So I could also write it like this, and I would in fact, whoops, if I was doing more than one, value, then I would have to pass in a dictionary like this. But since I'm only doing one, I can just pass it in like I have shown here. So I'm going to write this, reload it. Now you can see it comes out green. If I select purple, it comes in purple. Okay, so enough with animation effects. The last thing I want to show you is how you can associate callback functions with events in jQuery. So right now, if we look at color.html, we can see that we have onload equals request counts, and down here, every time for each button, we have unclick equals submit ballot. Well, there's two issues with this. First, it's generally good practice to separate your HTML from your JavaScript. So you don't really want to be putting JavaScript into your HTML. Instead, you want it up here in the script, in the header. We are saying, okay, the source file is countBallot.js. We really want all the JavaScript statements in count balance. So we'd really like to get rid of this onload. We'd really like to get rid of this onClick. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with onload. So as the book said, there is a ready function that you can use in jQuery. And in fact, it is so ubiquitous that you just write the $sign and a function, and it knows that this is associated with the ready event, which is called after the page has completely loaded, which is what you want. The page needs to completely load. The DOM needs to have been set up so then your function can access elements of the DOM. So this is so ubiquitous, we just can say $sign function, and it knows that this function should get executed when I load the page. So we're going to call get, because that's what request counts is. So we don't even need request counts anymore. So in fact, let's just go up to request counts, because we can just replace request counts, which was being called by onload, with this $sign. So we're getting rid of request counts. We just delete this. And now we're going to call it this anonymous function when the page loads. So this idiom right here, we just have $sign and then the function this function gets called when the page is loaded. And to check it out, you can see it worked. So it actually did load the counts just as we wanted. Okay, now we'd like to get rid of these on-click events. Not only are we mixing HTML with JavaScript, but the second thing I was going to mention earlier is we have to tediously associate this on-click with every single radio button. Well, if we add another radio button, we might forget. So we want to get rid of this on-click. So let me go ahead and do that, and I'm just going to pause for a moment. Okay, so I just got rid of all of the on-click events, all 5 of them. And what I'm going to do instead is add them in the count ballot. And I'm going to add them in the ready event because that is what I need to do, is add the click event right after I've loaded the page. And I can do that in this case by using input as my selector, and I want the input associated with color. So that allows me to find all inputs whose name is color, and I'm going to set their click event to be submit ballot. So you notice I replace 5 times having to say on click with just a single statement. Don't even have to write a for each loop because this selector right here finds all inputs whose name is color and allows me to associate click ballot with it. Let's make sure it works. Update failed. Okay, so what happened in this case? We got this when I hit it. Whoops. Update failed. So it's meaning we know if we look at update failed, that's what we alert when we call update counts and for some reason the color couldn't be added. And we're not really sure what's going on down here, but I can tell you that the problem is that when I'm up in my submit ballot, element is no longer defined. So before I was calling on click, and if we look at what I was doing before, you'll see that onClick right here called this, and it was passing in the element that was selected. With JQuery, you no longer get that element, so there's no argument being passed to submit ballot, but not to fear because you can still get that element with this. So you still are getting a pointer to the object that's selected. You just have to use the this variable now rather than using element. So I believe now if I reload this, yep, it worked just fine. Okay, so again, with that one statement right here, down here, I was able to eliminate all of the click events that I had to put into the HTML, but I did also have to remember that up here in submit ballot, it no longer took an argument. Instead, I got the value of the selected element through the this pointer. So this concludes our lecture with JQuery. We've gone through the different aspects of JQuery, how to use selectors, how to append and delete elements from the DOM. We looked at registering callback functions just a moment ago. We did the animation with showing the selection of the saying you selected this color, having it being displayed and then removed after 3 seconds. We showed a couple examples of AJAX calls with JQuery and how they significantly reduce the number of statements you have to write with AJAX. Also with the selectors, we showed how you could change styles with a call to CSS or the text with a call to either the HTML or text functions. You may need to review this lecture when you're doing your Web Project 3 because you'll be needing to do all of these things in Web Project 3, and I think it's easier to use jQuery than it is to use straight JavaScript, although you're free to use either one.